So we're starting off our video today in a less scenic area, but more interesting, I think. So we're underneath the highway, next to the Mooney Ponds Creek Trail here. I think it's a cool mix of, you know, very intense architecture and vague nature. Anyway, today we are talking about something related to our previous videos. So we spoke previously about how doing made-to-order blades and even just the nature of knives in Nepal, it can be pretty spiky sometimes. There can be big intense periods and there can be slow periods, and how this can cause problems for blacksmiths. So today we are talking about a work guarantee. Now let's say there's a time where, you know, a YouTube review comes out, or maybe the United States government puts out stimulus checks and gives Americans $3,000 that they all want to spend on Nepalese made knives, of course. In this situation, we get a lot of orders, and for us to be able to handle that without completely insane ballooning timelines, we need to have more smiths on. But the more smiths you have on, you run into another issue, which is the low points get riskier. So let's say you've got 2 blacksmiths, you know, your low points aren't that low. You know, every smith needs, I don't know, 8 blades a week, right? To be happy to work that much and earn and be able to pay for their families and live their lives. And let's say you can consistently provide, you know, a minimum, an absolute floor of 16 blades a week. But then what happens if you need to account for these spikier times, these big order increases, and get a 3rd smith? In these situations, you are gonna end up with you're gonna have to get a 3rd smith, right? And when you get a 3rd smith, now all of a sudden, when you're in your low points, you need to get 24 blades. And this is really, really difficult, right? You've just increased the bare minimum amount of orders you have coming through your workshop by 150%. And that's a difficult thing to navigate. And you know, you can't necessarily just give smiths less than 8 blades a week, right? Let's say, oh, maybe we'll give them 6 or 4. And it's like, okay, well, why not just work for another kukri maker, you know? And this just doesn't really happen, right? It's kind of an all or nothing situation. You go into these new places, you have to learn new patterns. Everywhere's got their own QC things, and you know, you have to really live in that specific workshop to get into their style of making and make sure you're delivering at the right QC level, but also at the right output. You know, maybe you have to lower your QC level. It's all very disruptive. It's not as transferable immediately as you might think. The other thing is that a lot of smiths are actually traveling for their jobs. So maybe they work in Kathmandu and their family is actually, you know, 30 or 40 k's away somewhere else in the city or out in the hills. Or maybe they're even from a village, which is even further away. The final thing is, though, that generally employers do not allow for smiths to work at more than one house at once. And the reason for that is, one is just to throttle competition. You know, they want to remain as in control of their smith as possible. They want to make sure that their skills are being put to work in their own workshop and nowhere else. But the other thing is that sometimes smiths can have debts. Yeah, generally in Nepal, if you need to go get a loan, as a blacksmith at least, you get it from your boss. You don't go to some private third entity, you go to them. Maybe you need money to get a motorbike. You get sick, if your mum gets sick, If your kids get sick, you can't pay for it. Your boss fills that gap. And you know, that is something that you work out with your boss. And maybe you don't even pay it back in money. Maybe you just work and get paid less. Or maybe you don't get paid at all for a period of time so that you can pay it off. Now this is a pretty strange, unusual situation from a Western perspective, but this is what happens. And let's say you do have some debts to your employer and you go start working for another manufacturer. That employer now feels way less stable about you actually paying that off. They think maybe, oh, you're halfway in, you're halfway out, you're gonna leave, and then they're not gonna get their money back. So that's one reason why they're scared of it. We're gonna probably talk again in future, in a later video, about why this is not a particularly perfect system. I think it's important to understand there's a lot of systemic inertia to them staying with a specific employer, and so they really need to be getting a sustainable amount of orders from them. So as part of solving these low spots, we've already talked about stock blades, but maybe we don't necessarily have the ability to put orders out for stock blades during this time. You know, what happens if we cannot do 8 blades? What would usually happen is the smiths would leave. They would say, okay, I can't, you know, work here anymore, they can't support me, and they'll start working for someone else, which is not something that is good for the employer either. So it's something we both want to avoid. So something we thought about is a work guarantee, which is that while you're with us, we'll make sure that you are paid for 8 blades worth of work a week, even if you haven't actually made that blades, because we cannot get you those orders. This kind of works like a base salary. It gives a bit of a safety net in times where, you know, let's say there's a bunch of tariffs that get released, or maybe there's an international oil crisis that makes shipping really expensive and complicated. You know, the risk here is absorbed by Kailash management, which is Radhe and Vishnu and Siru. And there's a cost associated with that, but we've done the numbers and we can work that into the pricing of each blade, and it's not that significant, but it provides, you know, a lot of smoothness to the people making the knives, which is something that's really important to us. Okay, well, a bit of a different environment for our video today. Sunset in inner West Melbourne underneath the highway. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying these updates too. They're pretty hard, but we're sticking to our schedule so far, which is great. And yeah, hope you're having a great day.